Have you ever had one of those days where an old argument just kind of bubbles back up to the surface of your mind?
Oh, absolutely. Out of nowhere.
Right, out of absolutely nowhere, like something you thought was totally settled years ago, or maybe you've woken up feeling just incredibly exhausted and inexplicably irritated.
And you can't point to a single logical reason why you're carrying all that tension.
Exactly. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into our sources to figure out why the universe might actually be orchestrating that sudden irritation for you. We're looking at a really fascinating synthesis of two different sources.
Yeah, both originating from Tarot by High Sex.
Right, tarotbyhick.net. And specifically, we're mapping out the energy for March 15th, 2026. Our mission for this deep dive is to really understand the intense friction between the things we try so desperately to hide and the things the universe, well, absolutely demands that we say out loud.
It is a profoundly layered set of materials we're dealing with today because on the purely astrological side, we have the mechanical breakdown of a really specific planetary alignment.
Which is Mercury retrograde in a tight conjunction with Mars.
Exactly. But instead of just leaving that as some, abstract celestial concept, we also have this companion piece of allegorical fiction. It's a StoryScope fable called The Wind That Returned Words.
I love that title.
It's great, right? And it grounds that exact astrological energy in a visceral physical narrative. It gives you this sensory map of what the cosmic weather actually feels like when it crashes into your daily routine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we step into the narrative of that fable, we really need to understand the physics of the astrological weather we're dealing with first.
Yeah, we have to lay the groundwork.
So the forecast isolates March 15, 2026, and it defines the atmosphere created by this Mercury-Mars conjunction as, quote, emotionally saturated energy.
That phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is. Now, for anyone listening who already tracks planetary movements, you know that Mars is the engine. It's the planet of action, kinetic drive, aggression.
It's the gas pedal.
Right. But the forecast emphasizes the friction created by its proximity to Mercury, which is, importantly, in retrograde.
And that friction is the entire key to understanding this period. I mean, think about the mechanical function of these two planets. Mars just wants to push forward relentlessly. It wants to initiate and confront.
Wants to go.
It wants to go. But Mercury governs our mental processing, right? Our communication. When they form a conjunction, they're occupying the exact same degree of the zodiac. They are fusing their energies.
But Mercury is moving backward.
Exactly. From our perspective on Earth, it's in retrograde. So you have an unstoppable force colliding with a reverse steering column. You are slamming on the gas pedal while the transmission is locked in reverse.
Wow.
The sheer internal pressure that creates is just immense.
And the practical, real-world result of that internal pressure, at least according to the forecast, is that people suddenly become incredibly forthright and direct.
Yes, but not in a fun way.
Yeah. No, not at all. We are not talking about, like, helpful diplomatic directness. We are talking about unfinished conversations violently resurfacing. Anger totally disguising itself.
That's the part that really gets me.
Right, the specific way this anger masks its presence. Because it doesn't always look like shouting. The source notes that this pressure cooker of emotionally saturated energy often disguises itself as deep fatigue. Or heavy sarcasm.
Or those really biting passive-aggressive comments.
Exactly. You might just feel completely drained for no reason or suddenly throw a temper tantrum at the absolute worst possible moment. Like, I don't know, crying in the middle of a grocery store aisle.
The fatigue is such a crucial symptom to highlight here. Because this energy is emotionally saturated, it operates on a subconscious, almost bodily level. You aren't consciously plotting a confrontation.
You're just trying to get through the day.
Right, but you're carrying around this massive, invisible weight of unresolved grievances. And the sheer caloric and psychological effort required to keep those difficult emotions suppressed, that is what drains you. The exhaustion is just the physical toll of holding the lid on a boiling pot.
Which brings up a scenario I think literally everyone listening can relate to. This energy sounds exactly like accidentally hitting send on a draft email you wrote when you were furious, like 3 years ago.
Oh no, the worst feeling.
You know, the exact kind of email I mean. You type it all out just to vent. You get all the vitriol out of your system, you save it safely in your drafts folder, and you convince yourself you've moved on.
But you haven't.
You haven't. And what this forecast is telling us is that during this specific alignment on March 15th, the universe is essentially bypassing your conscious control and hitting the send button for you. Ready or not, that raw, unedited emotion is going out into the world.
What's fascinating here is the underlying intent behind that forced release.
Yeah, why does it happen?
Well, the text is highly explicit that these sudden eruptions, the leaked emails, the grocery store tantrums, the sarcastic snaps, they do not occur simply to generate random chaos.
So the universe isn't just playing a prank on us.
Not at all. The purpose of this alignment is to forcefully reveal what was never fully resolved. It's a mandated excavation of the truth. When we refuse to willingly articulate our frustrations, this specific planetary gravity pulls those suppressed emotions into language.
It completely bypasses our polite filters.
Exactly.
A mandated excavation. I mean, that sounds incredibly destabilizing. And because phrases like emotionally saturated energy can still feel a little bit clinical, the source material brilliantly translates this transit into a StoryScope.
It takes the physics of the forecast and builds a fictional world to show us the consequences.
Yes. So we are transported to the Valley of Lethara. And the geographic isolation of this place is described so vividly. It sits far beyond the last mapped sea, tucked away past these immense salt deserts and strange forests that literally hum in the darkness.
It's such an eerie setting, and the travelers who manage to arrive there, they immediately report a profound sense of unease. They describe the atmosphere as feeling heavy, like the air itself is actively listening to their conversations.
It's an incredibly evocative, almost claustrophobic detail. And we quickly learn why the air feels that way. In the Valley of Lethara, the fundamental law of nature is that the wind remembers every single word that has ever been spoken.
Everything.
Everything. And it doesn't just hold on to the pleasantries or the polite greetings. The narrative specifically notes that the wind hoards the hurried, dismissive replies. It catches the cruel remarks tossed like stones.
It absorbs all those bitter arguments that ended with slammed doors.
And trailing unfinished sentences. Every unspoken resentment is just hanging there, suspended invisibly in the atmosphere right above the town.
But for the vast majority of the year, the valley maintains this perfect, fragile calm. The townspeople go about their daily routines, they exchange polite nods.
They diligently keep their heads down.
Right, they ignore the invisible weight above them. But the rhythm of the valley is dictated by a meteorological event that happens once every few seasons. A specific wind blows down from the eastern mountains, and the village elders refer to it as the returning breath.
The returning breath. When this wind descends on Lethara, we see the absolute, literal manifestation of that Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars energy. The polite fictions completely disintegrate.
It's total chaos.
It is. The text describes how, under the influence of the returning breath, people suddenly blurt out their most heavily guarded thoughts. Old quarrels literally rise up. The source describes them as being like bones beneath the soil.
And the fable paints this incredibly chaotic scene in the village market to illustrate it.
Yeah, tell us about the market.
You have a spice merchant screaming to break up a physical fight. A baker is furiously shouting at his own brother over some tiny forgotten debt from years ago. And lovers are just talking over each other with such frantic intensity that their words blur into total nonsense.
Wait, okay, hold on. I have to push back on the logic of these townspeople for a second.
Oh.
Yeah, because if you are fully aware that you live in a geographically isolated valley where a seasonal wind literally weaponizes your past cruelties and forces your darkest resentments out of your mouth, why on earth would you ever step foot outside your house?
That's a fair question.
Right. The narrative explicitly points out that the wind carries cruel remarks tossed like stones. That sounds like a recipe for the total irreversible destruction of a community. Why wouldn't the people of Lethara just board up their windows, lock their doors, and take a vow of absolute silence until the returning breath passes?
Well, that seems like the most rational survival strategy from an outsider's perspective. But it fundamentally misunderstands the physics of the wind, which the village elders actually comprehend perfectly.
Que peso.
The returning breath, just like the astrological transit it represents, is not an invading force. It isn't a curse bringing foreign debris or external malice into the town. It is only returning the exact acoustic material that the townspeople themselves fed into the air.
Oh, I see.
So if they were to board up their windows and hide indoors, they wouldn't be escaping the weather. They would simply be trapping themselves inside small, sealed rooms with the suffocating ghosts of their own unspoken resentments.
Oh, wow. So hiding inside just means you're trapped in a phone booth with all those furious draft emails. There's no escaping the signal.
Precisely. The wind acts as an unavoidable forcing function. It drags these slippery, incredibly clumsy and painful conversations out into the public square because the elders know the alternative is terminal for the community.
The alternative is letting it fester.
Right. Allowing those resentments to permanently fester, remaining buried like bones in the soil, slowly poisoning the roots of the town. A community or a relationship really built on a graveyard of unspoken truths will eventually collapse under its own weight. So the chaos in the market isn't destruction. It's a necessary, deeply uncomfortable purge.
The universe demands a purge. I love that. And it's not just our vocabulary that gets scrambled and weaponized during this period. That same frantic, emotionally saturated energy leaks directly into our behaviors too.
Yes, it absolutely does.
The pressure to escape these uncomfortable feelings drives people to take really sudden action, which brings us to a completely different danger highlighted in the forecast, the peril of impulsive life choices.
The astrological source material issues a very stark, very uncompromising warning for the days surrounding March 15. It explicitly advises against signing up for any new projects, launching new ambitions, or making grand, sweeping changes to your life path.
Which honestly feels totally counterintuitive at first glance. If Mars is sitting right there, providing all this intense kinetic drive and passion, shouldn't we be harnessing that exact energy to aggressively pursue new goals?
You would think so, but it creates a powerful illusion of forward momentum. Because the energy is so saturated and uncomfortable, we desperately want an outlet. We want to channel the frustration into something productive to get it out of our bodies.
That makes sense.
But the forecast explicitly warns that any new initiative launched under this specific retrograde alignment is built on a foundation of sand. The passion fueling the project is highly volatile and will inevitably fizzle out, usually much sooner rather than later.
And the StoryScope mirrors this psychological trap flawlessly. While half the market is tearing each other apart with resurface arguments, the returning breath is simultaneously infecting other townspeople with wild, sudden bursts of inspiration.
It's a completely different symptom of the same wind.
Yeah. We are introduced to a blacksmith who, in the middle of a chaotic day, abruptly decides he is going to drop his entire livelihood, secure a boat, sail across the ocean, and become a pearl diver.
It's a massive, life-altering pivot.
Huge. But by that very same evening, the inspiration is completely evaporated and he's changed his mind. We also hear about a farmer who loudly announces this grand plan to plant complex orchards across the entire expanse of the valley, only to totally abandon the idea 2 days later.
The text beautifully captures the ephemeral nature of this feeling. It notes that the wind carries, quote, sparks of passion that breathed bright and vanished just as quickly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the psychology behind the blacksmith wanting to be a pearl diver is so incredibly relatable. To me, this feels exactly like a midnight online shopping spree, but applied to your actual life goals.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy.
You know that exact feeling when it's 2 a.m., your mind is racing,
Yeah.
and you suddenly decide you are going to become someone who weaves their own tapestries.
Yes.
So you immediately order a massive floor loom
Yeah.
and hundreds of yards of expensive yarn.
Yeah.
And then arrives in boxes on Tuesday. It takes up half your living room. And you look at it and think, what was I thinking? I don't even have the patience to knit.
Exactly.
It's that exact impulse. But instead of a hobby, it's your career or your relationship status.
That is the ultimate trap of Mars's drive being filtered through Mercury's retrograde distortion. It feels incredibly urgent in the body. It masquerades as a profound, life-altering epiphany. You feel a desperate need to act right now.
But it's a trap.
It is entirely an illusion of momentum, designed to distract you from the heavier emotional work the transit is actually asking you to do.
So if the forecast is telling us point blank that these sudden passions are largely illusions destined to fizzle out, how are we practically supposed to navigate these intense sparks of enthusiasm?
It requires a lot of discipline.
Right, because for anyone listening right now, if you wake up on March 15th with a burning, all-consuming desire to quit your corporate job and open a bakery in another country, how do you process that without feeling the deep regret of ignoring a genuine calling?
If we connect this to the bigger picture laid out in the forecast, the mechanism for handling this becomes clear. The source warns that the danger lies in getting so completely intoxicated by an idea that we charge off to execute it immediately, only to find ourselves holding a floor loom we don't want. The operative word to watch out for is charge. The danger isn't having the idea about the bakery. The danger is the reckless, immediate execution of it. The actionable takeaway for the listener is to become an observer of your own enthusiasm. You must strictly delay the commitment phase.
So, drop the blueprints for the orchard, maybe research the soil types, but absolutely do not buy the actual seeds yet.
Exactly. Let the returning breath blow through completely. Wait out the retrograde transit. If the desire to open that bakery still holds substantial emotional weight a week or two later, long after the emotionally saturated energy has dissipated and the pressure cooker has vented, then you can trust it as a genuine calling.
And if not,
If it was simply a spark carried by the chaotic wind, it will peacefully extinguish itself before you've done any structural damage to your life or your finances.
observe the enthusiasm, delay the commitment. That is highly practical. But that brings us to the most vital question of this entire synthesis.
What last?
Yes. If the grand new projects are destined to fade, and the sudden life changes are just elaborate illusions, what actually survives this cosmic event? What has permanence once the wind dies down? To understand that, we really have to look at the emotional core of the fable. We have to examine the interaction between a woman named Mira and a man named Corin.
Their confrontation in the center of the market is the absolute anchor of the entire narrative. The fable introduces Mira as a pragmatic fig seller, and Corin as a man she had a devastating falling out with exactly 3 years prior.
3 years.
They hadn't spoken a single word to each other since the day their initial communication tangled, wild accusations flew, and they both stubbornly walked away without ever explaining what was actually breaking their hearts.
And naturally, the returning breath forcefully maneuvers them right in front of each other at the village well. And what unfolds is not, a neat cinematic reconciliation with perfect dialogue.
No, it is agonizingly messy.
Extremely messy. The narrative describes Mira's chest physically tightening. When she finally speaks, the words are rejected from her mouth much harder and sharper than she ever intended. She cruelly tells Corin that he was always chasing foolish, impossible dreams.
And he immediately fires back, deeply defensive. He states that he only left because she clearly didn't care about him at all.
It is the textbook definition of the slippery, chaotic, confusing communication the astrology forecast warned us about.
But we have to look closely at the shift that happens when the sheer exhaustion finally overtakes the anger. By nightfall, the manic energy of the wind begins to settle. Mira and Corin are still sitting by the well. The logistical details of their argument haven't been neatly resolved, but they have completely run out of defensive vocabulary.
They're just too tired to fight anymore.
They are too tired to maintain the armor. The narrative reveals that Corin finally drops the posturing and admits he didn't leave the valley because he thought Mira was unsupportive of his ambitions. He left because he was utterly convinced she wouldn't care if he disappeared.
And then Mira finally exhales. Her armor cracks, and she admits the underlying reality. I cared too much.
It's such a powerful moment.
It's a total gut punch of a realization. All that clumsy, weaponized, harsh communication from earlier in the day, all the insults about his foolish dreams, it was nothing more than a protective shell constructed around a terrifyingly vulnerable truth.
She was terrified.
She was paralyzed by the fear that he would eventually leave and the valley would feel unbearably empty without him. But instead of just saying, I am terrified to lose you, she went on the attack and criticized his ambitions.
This brings us squarely back to the psychological mechanics of the astrological forecast. The text explicitly states that during this transit, anger frequently disguises itself. In Mira's case, the anger wasn't masking fatigue. It was masking deep, profound fear. It was a disguise for caring far too deeply and feeling out of control. And the astrological source introduces a critical concept here. It states that the clumsy, difficult conversations unfolding during this conjunction on the 15th are actively setting the karmic storyline that will define reality around March 17th.
So what does this all mean? How does a conversation set a karmic storyline? For Mira, Corin, and really anyone navigating this transit, it means we have to reevaluate the tragedy of an argument.
Yes.
The actual tragedy isn't that we raise our voices or disagree. The tragedy is that we instinctively utilize anger and sarcasm as shields to protect our most tender, frightening emotions. The karmic storyline isn't about, mystical retribution. Karma simply means action.
Cause and
Exactly. When you finally speak a truth into the air, you initiate an action that absolutely demands a reaction. It permanently alters the timeline. And the deeply reassuring takeaway for the listener is that even if you are currently stumbling over your words, even if your delivery is incredibly clumsy and defensive right now, that clumsiness is the necessary first step. You do not have to be perfectly articulate to be profoundly true.
That is the ultimate wisdom of the transit, and it is exactly what the elders of Lethara understood about the wind. The fable concludes by observing that the strange weather simply refuses to allow certain words to remain safely buried underground. It forcefully drags unfinished thoughts into the open air.
It demands to be heard.
And the most critical, defining line of the entire text is this. Once a truth had been spoken aloud, even clumsily, it could never quite be taken back. It irreversibly shapes the architecture of everything that happens next.
You cannot unring the bell. Once the truth leaves your mouth, the timeline shifts and you are forced to deal with the reality of it.
The illusions are temporary. The blacksmith's dream of the ocean fades. The farmer's grand orchard is forgotten. But the clumsy, terrifying truth shared by the well establishes a permanent foundation. The cosmic weather of a Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars is not a chaotic force trying to ruin your life with random outbursts of anger.
Yeah.
It is a highly targeted pressure system designed to aggressively burn away the polite, comfortable fictions you've been using to survive so you can finally begin moving forward on authentic, solid ground.
That is an incredibly powerful framework to keep in mind. So as we synthesize everything we've covered today, here is your practical survival guide for navigating the intense energy surrounding March 15, 2026. First, do not upend your entire life to become a pearl diver.
Please don't.
If you are suddenly struck by a burning, obsessive desire to initiate a massive new life project, write the idea down in a notebook, close the notebook, and walk away. Observe the enthusiasm, but strictly delay the commitment.
A very solid rule.
Second, monitor your physical body closely. If you feel deeply, inexplicably fatigued, or you notice your responses becoming heavily laced with sarcasm, do not mistake that for simple lack of sleep. Ask yourself what hidden frustration or unspoken fear is draining your battery.
Hook under the hood.
And finally, when the returning breath of an unresolved conversation blows into your life, do not barricade yourself indoors. Have the courage to face the wind, even if you stumble over every single word you try to say.
This raises one final, incredibly important question, and it is the thought I want you to sit with long after you finish listening today. The text asserts that once a truth is spoken aloud during the returning breath, even clumsily, it can never be taken back, and it permanently shapes everything that follows.
Right.
But consider the extreme internal pressure of that specific moment. What if the truth we suddenly blurt out under the immense weight of this planetary pressure isn't actually our deepest, most authentic truth at all, but rather our deepest, most unhealed wound simply masquerading as the truth? How do we differentiate between the voice of an old, triggered wound and the voice of our genuine foundational truth?